Whitby, England, 1890. In a quiet reading room above the harbor, a tired Irish clerk named Bram Stoker copied names from a travelogue. Beside him lay a map of Transylvania, a borrowed book titled An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, and a stray note in his handwriting, Dracula means devil. 6 centuries earlier, in the mountain town of Târgoviște, villagers spoke of Vlad III, the prince who impaled thieves and traitors in his orchard until the crows refused to land. It was folklore, they said, a nationalist legend. Yet travelers kept writing of the smell that lingered long after. Everyone thought Stoker's vampire was only Gothic fiction. But the archived letters, the coroner's accounts, and the language of revenge in those medieval chronicles tell a colder truth. In a museum in Bucharest, behind glass, rests a cracked wood stake labeled simply Relic 1477. Decades later, Hollywood would soften this story. Târgoviște, Wallachia, 1459. The first official record of Vlad Dracula's methods appears in a German pamphlet printed in Nuremberg in 1463. The fragile document titled Of the Tyrant Dracula, How He Impaled His Enemies, survives in 7 confirmed copies. Historians at the Augsburg Staatsbibliothek have verified their authenticity through paper composition analysis. The accompanying woodcut shows a disturbing image. Vlad dining among forests of impaled victims, seemingly unmoved by their suffering. What modern readers cannot detect is the pamphlet's smell, a musty combination of iron-infused ink and mold, as archivists at the Staatsbibliothek have noted. Pages turn with a whisper of deterioration. The woodblock impressions leave tactile shadows on fingertips. Ottoman records from 1460 contain testimonies from merchants describing the field where men still stood upright, long dead. One scribe recorded a witness statement: the crows would not land among them, for they feared the prince more than hunger. Archaeological surveys conducted in 2003 near the presumed execution grounds revealed soil with abnormally high concentrations of lime and ash, consistent with mass disposal of human remains. For centuries afterward, the name Dracula carried dual meaning: protector of Wallachia against Turkish invasion, and monster who taught justice through exemplary cruelty. Court documents show his victims were primarily thieves, traitors, and enemies of state, his methods legally sanctioned, yet the theatrical nature of his punishments transcended mere law. The townsfolk of Târgoviște stopped walking near the castle orchard after dusk, even generations after Vlad's death. Local parish records indicate reduced attendance at evening services near execution grounds, a pattern that persisted into the 18th century. Buda, 1462. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in Hungarian National Archives reveals how foreign emissaries perceived Vlad. One letter from Benedictus de Bosna, an envoy of King Matthias Corvinus, describes an unsettling reception. He greets you with impaled men as candles of obedience. The parchment shows signs of water damage along one edge. The ink has faded to a rusty brown. Archivists note that Benedictus was later executed for forgery, raising questions about the accuracy of his accounts. However, 3 separate envoy reports confirm the presence of execution fields visible from castle approaches, a deliberate warning to visitors. The Vatican archives, Reg Vatmer 478, contain correspondence acknowledging Dracula Voivode, cruel but faithful to the cross. Church officials debated whether to formally condemn his methods, but ultimately prioritized his value as a defender against Ottoman expansion. The letter's margins show small crosses drawn by readers, possibly as protection. The deliberate archiving of these documents created an unintended permanence. What might have been forgotten instead became part of European historical memory, preserved in library catalogs and diplomatic inventories. The cracked leather bindings of these collections still release dust when opened. In preservation rooms, dehumidifiers hum quietly to protect the paper. 4 centuries later, Stoker would encounter William Wilkinson's English translation of these records. His research notebook, currently held at the Harry Ransom Center in Texas, shows the same phrase, cruel but faithful, underlined twice in blue pencil. An archivist who handled the notebook in 1982 reported that the pressure of the underlining nearly cut through the paper. From vengeance, religion had carved its own kind of immortality, one that would outlive both Vlad and the empire he fought against. London, 1890. Attendance logs from the British Museum reading room confirmed that Bram Stoker visited regularly between 1887 and 1890. His request slips, preserved in the museum's administrative archives, show an unusual pattern: travel books on Eastern Europe, medical texts on bat-borne diseases, and dispatches from the Crimean War. The paper trails of research reveal the birth of a legend. Stoker's surviving notebook, catalog number 8972, Ransom Center, University of Texas, contains precise timetables for trains between London and Romania, feeding schedules for predatory mammals, and a single Romanian word written beside vampire in a tight, cramped hand. The pages crackle when turned. Conservators note that Stoker pressed so hard with his pencil that some entries remain readable even where the graphite has faded. He spent 3 days with Wilkinson's, an account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, a historical text referencing Voivode Dracula in a footnote. Historian Paul Murray confirmed through handwriting analysis that Stoker cross-copied entire phrases from these travel histories into what would become his novel. A British museum clerk named Thomas Wentworth later recalled in a 1912 interview, "He took notes in the manner of a detective, as if it had really happened. Most gentlemen writing adventure tales browse. Mr. Stoker interrogated the books." The interview transcript remains in the museum's staff archive, its edges yellowing and corners worn from handling. By then, Vlad's supposed tomb at Snagov Monastery had been opened and found empty. Photographic plates from the initial 1885 examination show a stone sarcophagus with disturbed soil inside. Local witnesses claimed the earth there churned unevenly when church bells rang, an assertion repeated in the monastery's visitor log but dismissed by academic researchers. What began as historical research had triggered something less definable: the transformation of documented atrocity into supernatural threat. Snagov Monastery, 1931. Romanian archaeologists officially reopened Vlad's supposed tomb under the direction of historian Constantin Karaja. Black and white photographs published in Revista Istorica document their findings. Within the stone sarcophagus lay no human remains, only animal bones, fragments of textile, and a decaying metal shroud clasp. The photos show white-gloved hands lifting the artifacts. Dust particles float visible in the camera's flash. Laboratory analysis concluded the animal remains were feline, possibly placed there in a later period. The shroud clasp, however, dated appropriately to the 15th century based on metallurgical composition. Museum records indicate it was catalogued as Item 4071, funerary accessory Tepe's tomb, and stored in the National History Museum of Romania. Local witnesses to the excavation, interviewed by folklorist Maria Tataru in 1972, maintained that the prince's body had been removed by monks who feared his soul unrested. The monastery's ledger from 1889 contains an entry by Father Nicodem. "We sang Mass, but something knocked from below. The brothers refused night prayers in the chapel." The ink shows signs of having been blotted multiple times, the script increasingly uneven across the page. Visitors to the monastery today can still see scratches on the altar stones. Guided tours explain them as damage from Soviet occupation. Church authorities ordered the tomb resealed in 1932 under ecclesiastical mandate, despite archaeologists' requests for further excavation. Forensic soil analysis conducted in 1972 found evidence of ground disturbance consistent with reburial nearby. An alternative site never located despite ground-penetrating radar surveys in 1998 and 2007. Equipment malfunctions plagued both attempts. Technicians reported unusual battery drainage when operating near the monastery's western wall. The absence created its own mystique, a historical figure whose physical remains eluded confirmation, leaving only the certainty of his documented cruelty. England, 1890. Whitby's local archives contain a research index in Stoker's hand, listing Whitby, storm, Russian ship, dog leap to shore. These notes correspond precisely to articles in the Whitby Gazette reporting the wreck of the Dmitry of Narva, a Russian schooner that ran aground during an August storm in 1885. The index card shows coffee stains along one edge. The handwriting grows smaller toward the bottom, as if conserving space. Harbor records confirm that the vessel carried timber and miscellaneous cargo from the Baltic. The first mate's body was reportedly found in the hold with severe trauma to the neck. The coroner's report, preserved in the North Yorkshire County Archives, attributes death to injuries sustained during the storm. Lighthouse keeper James Higgins told a local reporter, "Never seen dogs so afraid of a wreck before. Something on that ship frightened them proper." The interview appeared in the August 17th edition, preserved on microfilm in Whitby Museum's Maritime Collection. During his stay at Mrs. Vesey's guest house on the West Cliff, Stoker walked daily to St. Mary's Graveyard and the Clifftop Abbey ruins, popular with Victorian tourists seeking Gothic atmosphere. The guest book shows his signature on 3 consecutive days. The third entry appears rushed, the ink blotched as if applied in haste. Museum records indicate Stoker spent an afternoon examining logbooks from previous shipwrecks, copying phrases from sailors' superstition entries, black dogs, sea vampires, and blood tides. A museum assistant later recalled, "He asked about sailors' burial customs, then went very still. He borrowed paper to make notes and didn't speak again until closing." The logbook from the Dmitry remains in the Maritime Collection today. Its final page was torn out sometime before cataloging in 1901. The curator's inventory simply notes, "Last entry missing, damage unexplained." London Hospital Archives, 1892. Correspondence between Bram Stoker and Sir Joseph Lister, pioneer of antiseptic surgery, reveals the author's growing medical curiosity. 6 letters preserved in the Royal College of Surgeons collection show Stoker questioning Lister about blood transfusion techniques and what he termed the recycling of vital fluids. The paper has yellowed with age. Lister's responses become noticeably shorter in later exchanges. Attendance records from the British Medical Society confirm Stoker attended a public lecture on February 8, 1893, titled "Rare Blood Disorders and Their Manifestations." The lecturer, Dr. William Maudsley, discussed porphyria and other conditions that could explain historical accounts of vampirism. The attendance ledger shows Stoker's signature pressed deeply into the paper, followed by a question mark. Stoker's medical notes, now part of the Trinity College Dublin collection, include jotted phrases, rabies, hydrophobia, bites of wolves, transmission of curse. The pages contain small diagrams of circulation systems. Several show unusual stains that curators have never conclusively identified. Dr. Edward Thompson, who met Stoker at several medical society events, later told the British Journal of Medicine, he asked whether memory could survive in blood. An odd question from a theatrical manager, but he seemed genuinely troubled by the idea. The interview appears in the April 1897 issue, coinciding with Dracula's publication. The merging of folkloric consumption with Victorian medical understanding created something previously unseen in literature: supernatural horror justified by emerging science. In his novel, Stoker would transform the historical impaler into a blood-drinking contagion, mixing medieval cruelty with modern medical anxiety. Hospital archives show Stoker requested access to patient records regarding rare blood conditions. His application was denied, but lecture notes found among his papers suggest he obtained the information through other means. London, 1897. Before Dracula's publication, Stoker staged a private reading at the Lyceum Theatre to secure dramatic rights. Theater management records list only 12 attendees, including actor Henry Irving and 3 unnamed physicians. The small audience reportedly showed visible discomfort. Irving's personal secretary wrote in her diary, "Mr. I grew pale during the churchyard scene. I myself felt ill at descriptions too lifelike." One reviewer, writing for the theatrical paper The Era, left before the reading concluded. His brief notice mentioned a growing nausea at scenes mixing historical truths with unnatural appetites. The clipping, preserved in the Lyceum's promotional archives, shows penciled annotations in what appears to be Stoker's handwriting. Too much? Perhaps Transylvania scenes need softening. When Dracula appeared in print that May, early readers found its travel diary sections unusually detailed. The book's first-week sales records indicate modest success, with 287 copies sold. The Whitby Gazette published a concerned editorial noting that the novel blurred reportage and hallucination in a manner that may confuse the credulous. Library acquisition records from 1897 show that 3 regional libraries initially categorized the book under travel history before reclassifying it as fiction. Correspondence to the publisher included letters asking whether real ship crews had been interviewed for the Demeter's log sections. Constance Stoker, Bram's sister-in-law, wrote in her personal journal, "B seems troubled by the book's reception, says people keep asking what parts really happened." That same month, archaeological journals reported discoveries in Transylvania. Brick masons renovating a church foundation had unearthed 3 skeletons with iron spikes driven through their rib cages, a documented folk practice for laying the restless dead. London newspapers juxtaposed these findings with Stoker's novel, feeding public fascination with vampire lore. The factual and fictional began their long, inseparable dance. London, 1912. Following Bram Stoker's death from exhaustion and stroke, his widow, Florence Balcom, took control of his literary estate with remarkable precision. Solicitor records indicate she registered formal ownership of all manuscripts and notes within 8 days of his passing. The inventory, preserved at the Society of Authors Archive, lists 14 notebooks, 37 loose research papers, and various newspaper clippings among his effects. When playwright Hamilton Dean sought permission to adapt Dracula for the stage in 1924, correspondence shows Florence demanded script approval rights. The contract, held in the British Library's theatre collection, contains specific clauses restricting historical references. 3 pages of the original draft script show Florence's editing marks striking out lines that reference the historical prince and his impalement practices. In a private note to her solicitor, now held at Oxford's Bodleian Library, she wrote, "The cruelty belongs to history, the hunger to dreams. The latter sells theater tickets, the former only resurrects what is better forgotten." The stationery bears her personal monogram. The letter was folded and reopened so many times that the creases have begun to tear. After Florence's death in 1937, her solicitor Edgar Frere sold Stoker's remaining research notes to an American collector. The catalog of the sale, preserved at Christie's auction house, includes an item described as Lot 27, collection of newspaper clippings regarding Eastern European folklore, including 1882 article Vampires in Transylvania, Peasants Who Drink Blood of the Dead, with author's annotations. The collector, William Blackwood of Boston, reported in his acquisition notes, article heavily marked with Stoker's characteristic blue pencil. The phrase, "peasants exhume and stake the suspicious dead," is circled twice. Blackwood's collection was later donated to Harvard University, where it remains in climate-controlled storage. The separation of author from work had failed. His research materials continued their silent testimony. Bucharest and Cambridge, 1965. Historian Raymond McNally's appointment calendar shows his first research trip to Romania began March 15th. University expense records indicate he traveled with Romanian-born colleague Radu Florescu to investigate connections between the historical Vlad Tepes and Stoker's fictional count. Their academic papers, filed with Boston College, describe initial skepticism from Romanian authorities. The researchers gained access to monastic ledgers from Snagov and Bistrița monasteries. Florescu's field notes, preserved in his estate collection, record discovering entries naming Vlad Dracula in nearly identical form to Stoker's villain. One entry from 1476 described the voivode as returned from Hungarian captivity, more cruel than before. The ink had faded to near illegibility. Florescu's notebook contains careful tracings of the original Cyrillic text. Their book In Search of Dracula, published in 1972, presented the first photographic documentation linking historical sites to Stoker's novel. The publisher's archives contain over 60 rejected photographs, ruined fortresses, village elders crossing themselves when asked about Vlad, and the disputed tomb at Snagov. The images that made the final cut show visible fingerprints on their margins where editors handled them repeatedly. A BBC television documentary filmed the authors by torchlight in Poenari Castle, Vlad's actual fortress. Production logs note equipment failures, 3 lamps malfunctioned, and 1 interview had to be re-recorded due to unexplained audio interference. Sound technician Peter Hawes suffered what the crew described as a seizure while filming inside Snagov Monastery's chapel. Medical records from the American hospital in Bucharest confirm Hawes was admitted on September 17, 1972, and discharged 2 days later with a diagnosis of undetermined nervous episode. For the first time, scholarly investigation had attempted to separate fact from fiction, only to find the boundary unsettlingly permeable. Universal City, 1930-1992. Universal Studios production files reveal how Hollywood transformed Stoker's novel. The first cinematic adaptation, starring Bela Lugosi, removed nearly all historical references to Vlad Tepes. Studio memos preserved in the Margaret Herrick Library show producer Carl Lemmel Jr. ordering script revisions, remove all impalement scenes, public wants romance, not history lessons. The original screenplay draft, dated August 1930, contained a prologue showing Vlad's military campaigns. Script supervisor Dorothy Spencer noted on her copy, "Too violent for Hayes' office approval. Cut pages 1 to 11. The paper shows coffee stains and cigarette burns along its edges, relics of late-night revision sessions. Costume design sketches evolved from military uniform to formal evening wear. Makeup tests photographed on September 12, 1930, show Lugosi first in battle scars, then in the now iconic pale aristocratic appearance. Laboratory processing notes on the film negatives indicate they were deliberately underexposed to enhance shadow effects." Over subsequent decades, Dracula's historical origins faded further. Production budgets allocated increasingly larger percentages to special effects rather than historical research. Universal's financial records show that by the 1960s, marketing materials made no mention of Vlad Tepes whatsoever. When Francis Ford Coppola developed Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1992, he explicitly reintroduced the historical connection. Production designer Thomas Sanders told American Cinematographer magazine, "History made the monster believable. We built the impalement forest based on actual Ottoman accounts." The art department's reference library, cataloged in production archives, included 7 historical works on medieval Wallachia. Romanian Orthodox clergy issued formal complaints about the film's premiere. Patriarch Teoctist sent a letter to Columbia Pictures stating, "Sacred symbols and relics are misused in this entertainment." The studio's public relations department filed the complaint without response. The tension between devout memory and profitable myth had become its own cultural haunting. Vlad resurrected not through faith, but through the flicker of projected light. Bucharest, 2004. The National History Museum of Romania's exhibition records show the opening of Dracula, Hero or Monster on October 8th. Attendance logs indicate over 8,000 visitors in the first month. The centerpiece display featured 15th century coins bearing Vlad's image, reproductions of German propaganda pamphlets, and a wooden stake discovered during excavations near Poenari Castle in 1977. Museum security reports document unusual incidents. Visitors occasionally reported feeling unwell near the stake display. 3 required medical assistance for sudden dizziness. Environmental monitoring equipment recorded temperature fluctuations of 3 degrees Celsius in the vicinity of the case during quiet hours, despite climate control systems functioning normally. Chief Curator Dr. Ioana Petrescu implemented a special closing procedure for the exhibition. Maintenance logs show her signature each evening, beside the notation, "Glass intact, no cracks, voices again after closing." When interviewed by academic journal Studii Istorice in 2006, she explained, "It was a joke among staff about the whispering sounds from ventilation systems. We maintained the ritual for continuity." Security camera footage from November 14, 2004 captured an unexplained visual anomaly, apparent motion inside the sealed display case containing the stake. Technical review by systems engineer Mircea Popescu attributed the phenomenon to sensor interference from nearby electrical systems. His report notes that similar interference affected only this particular camera, despite identical equipment throughout the gallery. The exhibition, intended as historical education, unintentionally became a site of modern pilgrimage. Visitor comment books, preserved in the museum's administrative archive, show recurring themes: curiosity about Vlad's actual burial site, questions about vampiric folklore, and occasionally, apologies addressed directly to the prince himself. One entry, written in English, reads simply, "We turned your justice into entertainment. Perhaps that's punishment enough." The handwriting analysis requested by Dr. Petrescu proved inconclusive. Whitby Museum, present day. Correspondence records show the museum receives approximately 30 letters annually addressed to Count Dracula, Whitby, or variations thereof. Administrative policy directs staff to preserve these communications in archival boxes labeled Vampire Correspondence, currently containing over 600 items dating back to 1979. Curator Emma Richardson maintains the collection protocol established by her predecessor. Some contain drawings, she explained to Heritage Journal in 2023. Others include confessions or apologies. People write as if he were a real historical figure connected to Whitby. The letters arrive from 27 different countries, with increased frequency following new film adaptations. Local priest Father Michael Abbott reviews each letter before archival storage, a tradition begun in 1992 after a particularly disturbing series of communications. Church records list this as a voluntary community service. When questioned by documentary filmmakers in 2020, Abbott acknowledged, "Some pray as though he were saint or demon, maybe both. The lines blur when fiction draws from history." The museum's most valued Stoker-related artifact remains his annotated copy of the Whitby Gazette containing reports of the Dimitri of Narva shipwreck. Displayed in a climate-controlled case, the newspaper occasionally develops condensation on its protective glass, though humidity monitors show consistent readings. Conservation reports note this anomaly 6 times between 2018 and 2024. Tour guides have ceased mentioning this phenomenon following visitor complaints of headaches after viewing the display. Incident reports filed with museum management describe 5 separate occasions when electronic equipment, cameras, phones, audio guides, malfunctioned near the case. Technical assessment found no electromagnetic interference sources. The guest book beside the exit bears thousands of signatures. Handwriting experts consulted in 2021 identified at least 17 attempts to forge Bram Stoker in various entries. The most recent appears dated November 8, 2024, coinciding with a full moon and an unusually high tide. Belief begets artifact. Artifact begets belief. Narrator's Field Log, 2025. The archives in Bucharest close at dusk. The custodians follow protocol established 20 years ago. The stake display receives 2 turns of the key, and security sensors are tested twice. The glass case gleams under specialized lighting designed to minimize deterioration. Dust particles hang suspended in the beam, almost motionless. Standing before the display, our investigator hesitates, notebook ready but camera powered down per museum regulations. The visitor log from earlier researchers shows entries dating back decades. One signature stands out, a photocopy of B. Stoker, 1890, affixed to the page by previous museum staff as a point of historical interest. The paper has yellowed unevenly around the attachment. The stake itself remains unremarkable, weathered wood, approximately 40 centimeters long, with a sharpened end consistent with construction techniques of the 15th century. Its catalog entry lists discovered 1977 Poenari region and possible judicial implement. Carbon dating confirmed its age. Microscopic examination revealed trace elements consistent with human remains. No confirmed resting place for Vlad Tepes has ever been verified. Archaeological expeditions to Snagov, 1931, Kamana Monastery, 1975, and Princely Court Targoviste, 2003, all failed to denunce Locate definitive remains. Romanian Academy historians continue to list his burial location as undetermined. The investigator whispers an apology before leaving, not from superstition, but from the weight of historical reckoning. It has become customary among researchers to acknowledge the transformation of a national figure into global entertainment. Museum electronic visitor counters reset automatically at midnight, yet technical logs consistently show one additional count each morning, a system anomaly noted but unresolved since installation in 2014. Maintenance reports attribute it to software error. No camera has ever captured an unauthorized entry. The record ends here. The investigation continues.